Everyone. So again, I am from the Academic Advising Career Center, here to talk to you about something really exciting that's happening this month. So again, March is Choose Your Program Month. So that means this month you'll be making an informed decision on what program you want to be in. And we're here to provide you with resources and support so you can make the best decision. So I really wanted to talk about a couple of events that are happening this month. Last week, actually, we had a couple of events. So we had the kickoff event and the program fair. So hopefully you had a chance to drop by and see what that was about. But next week, on Tuesday and Wednesday, we will have Academic Advising Career Center staff in the meeting place. So it's a really great opportunity to drop by and speak to a staff one-to-one, face-to-face. And if you have any questions, you can just have them answered then. Or if you have any, or if you need any resources, I'm sure that's a great way to get referred. And another thing that I'm really excited about, I think this is an excellent opportunity to well, it's a great resource. So I remember when I was in first year, I used this a lot. So it's the online chat with the AANCC staff. And this happens every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in March from 2 to 3 p.m. So this is just something that's online. It's available on the Academic Advising and Career Center website. And so if you have any quick questions, this is an incredible opportunity to just just log on to that page and ask any quick questions you have with the staff. And so again, these are a couple of additional resources that you can refer to. These are all online. So we have the online module. This really walks you through the step-by-step process of choosing your program. It also provides you with additional dates and deadlines that are really pertinent to choosing your program for this semester. If you want to see some student testimonials from previous years, I think those are really helpful. And that's just students talking about their experience in their specific programs. And again, we have some tip sheets and some networking and panel events that you can always check out, and you can just visit that website to have more information and get more details. And again, we are from the Academic Advising Career Center, and that's just AC213. So if you ever have any questions, always feel free to give us a call at the number that's listed there. And you can always drop by, and the front desk people are super friendly, so either they'll ask you the questions or refer you to the resources that are most appropriate. And one final quick announcement. This is actually really pertinent to you guys as sociology students. So this Thursday, March 14th, from 2 to 3 p.m., we have a focus group discussion in AC321. And this is just really something that's really specific for sociology students. And it's just an opportunity where you guys can go if you are considering to choose a program, either minor, major, or a specialist in sociology. And it's just a great way to give more information and really contribute your ideas. So if you are interested in visiting or attending this, you also get a $10 TIM card for your participation. So if you are interested, you can contact Byung. His email is listed there. So I think it's a great opportunity to take part in. And if you are interested, you can email him. But I think that's all. So thank you so much for your time today. Yeah.
Oops. Let's tangle up. All right. Okay. Oh. I don't have my little clicky. Where is it? Otherwise, oh, it's different. Everything's different. Do you know how this goes on? Oh, I got it. Okay. New technology. How appropriate on the Media Week. And speaking of media, for any of you interested, again, and if you're interested. In the focus group discussion, and I think that would actually be really useful. That'll help with assignment 3, because even though you're not doing focus groups, you'll see how people are kind of doing semi-structured interviews. So you all should be masters of what focus groups are from the first half of the class, but basically in a focus group, it'll be a group of like-minded people that share some sort of social status. So in the case of the Sociology Launchpad, people contemplating sociology, and then they'll have maybe between 5 and 15 broad questions that they'll have you guys brainstorm answers about. So it's a fun way to again, see qualitative methods in action. So I'll leave those up here. And then there are, in case you're thinking where you're not quite sold yet on majoring in sociology or minoring or specializing, we have some propaganda. No, I'm joking. Obviously not. But it's nice and colorful, and I tested it myself, so it has like two separate, you can tear these off as bookmarks. So if you want a bookmark that says "why" on it, that's, it's up here. So if you want bookmarks, or you want propaganda, or you want pictures of Marx and stuff, they're up there. And again, I'm joking. It's made by the same people, and Byung is a very thoughtful person, and I appreciate all the work he's doing to help, spread the word of sociology. So this week we discuss media. This is a pretty fun week, I think. Often in this, I haven't seen all your test twos yet, but two of the TAs gave back some of the tests already. So I was looking through the kind of summary feedback question, the reflection questions, and a lot of you have mentioned that you really like that in this course we talk about pertinent social issues and controversial topics. And that sometimes the weeks can get kind of heavy in terms of like emotional content. So this week, we'll see how the media is very important or media in the plural, are very important as social structures that shape how we think, how we act, our sense of self, and everything like that. But the media can also be fun. The media constitutes everything from kind of, the classic medium of print media, so the newspaper, to, me having student-drawn photos of myself and making YouTube videos and potentially gaming videos. But I'll get to that later. The basic themes of this week, again, are the broad array of media, again, going way even before newspapers, so things like cave drawings, again, people just trying to articulate some sort of message, to very contemporary manifestations and beyond. And so one of the central concepts that I think is really kind of fun and sociological to think through is the claim by Marshall McLuhan that the medium is the message. So that'll kind of be our central anchoring point. So I'll explain what that means when we get to it. But for now, just think, whether you're learning by, say, a textbook, through lectures, through Revel quizzes, or through, all these other sorts of educational initiatives that are offered, the way that you perceive information, the medium that you use, again, whether it's electronic, in person, an argument, a speech, McLuhan is saying that the way that you receive information in many times, or in many cases, is just as important as the content of those messages themselves. So that's why I always ask for kind of formative feedback during tests, because I want to see, is this medium getting the message across? And is it shaping the message? Again, I'm trying to do that balance of making it fun and sticky, so you remember it, but at the same time not, totally goofy and unrelated to the course. So that's kind of, trying to have the perfect medium for the message. So when we talk about the media through time, so again, the media, typically when you think of the media, you probably think of newspapers and news stations, so things like CNN. You may think of tabloids. You may think, depending on how active you are on campus, you may think of U of T newspapers. All of these help transmit messages to members of a community. So media historically have been paramount to the formation of democratic societies. For any of you that take political science or history, or have taken courses in that, or liked taking that in high school, or like following the news, or global affairs, the right to freedom of press what is a major kind of social right around the world. And people, one measure of kind of societal progress towards democracy that people measure is people's actual right to, produce and disseminate documents and messages of their choosing. So again, I think I mentioned my staple class was the Sociology of Policing that I taught just this past summer, and I've taught kind of every semester up until the last two, now that I'm all busy with you guys. But in the Sociology of Policing, I had an entire week on the policing of pamphlets and newspapers. And again, how one of the major forms of social control was not letting people get their message out. So media, again, is a device. You can word it differently, but basically when you're thinking of media, think of them as tools that enable people to get their voice across. So again, as we'll see, that ranges all the way from cave art to Twitter posts. Again, you're getting a message out to the world. Mass media comes out of that fun period that I always discuss of industrialization, or the Industrial Revolution. So every culture has media and has had media to some extent. Again, one of the core differentiators of humans versus animals is that we have tangible culture. Remember, objective culture. We have items that we create. Media, again, are interesting in that they're vehicles or they're products that allow us to convey intangible culture. So that's kind of a mouthful, but again, things like newspapers, even drawings, art, and you see the paradigms we go through throughout history, all of these are ways for us to get our ideas out. Again, what I'm doing here in lecturing is the lecture is a form of media by which knowledge is transmitted. So media is huge, and it's always been around. However, once advances were made in such as the printing press, so people not having to draw out letters with ink and quill like they did before the printing press, and then later on in the 20th century, advances in telecommunications where people could use electricity as a medium by which to physically communicate one-on-one. This resulted in what was called mass media. So namely, when you think of mass media, the kind of earliest Western iterations of that are the newspaper and the television. But now, of course, as we'll see, mass media are things like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Again, one or more people can get their message to a wide audience. And for things like YouTube that are free, except for you have to pay for the internet or use it somewhere, the audience is unlimited. It's around the globe. Things like Netflix, again, as I mentioned, challenging TV because television stations are local and you often need cable. Again, things like Netflix, you can watch it anywhere in the world and you aren't bound to where you live and your local TV stations. So mass media, as we'll see, transitioning into the second half of the lecture, the scope of mass media expands as technology expands. Again, more kinds of media are being created. No one probably could have predicted, even 20 years ago, things like Instagram and Snapchat and whatever the heck you kids are using these days that I don't know. I keep only talking about the ones that are probably already becoming dinosaurs, like myself. So related to that, social media. Again, so societies have always had some version of social media, except we didn't call it that because they were just forms of mass communication. So again, when I talked about society in our weeks on politics, where I covered different aspects of how people form coalitions, and we'll see more of this next week in collective behavior. But social media are those forms of media that are specifically designed to enable people to connect with one another. So newspapers and the early printing press, again, they had that explicit function. Newspapers still do that, but they aren't really considered social media anymore because you can't directly communicate to one another through writing an article in, say, the New York Times. I mean, technically, if you write an article there, someone else can read it, and so you're communicating to them. But now there are much more direct forms of social media. So for example, Facebook Messenger, you log on, you send a message through that medium to a specific person who sees it right away. Even things like PowerPoint slides in the context of this class on Quercus. Quercus technically is what's called an LMS, a learning management system, but it could also be considered a form of social media in that, I post slides and make announcements, and I try to connect all of the study buddies in this class and share my propaganda with all of you and get you to think the way I want you to think. So it's a kind of top-down social media where the key here is I'm trying to build a social community within the broader framework of kind of an academic learning environment. So again, as you'll see, the concepts the broad concepts that we're dealing with centered around the media should be ringing a lot of bells and drawing a lot of implicit connections with our culture week. Again, these are people that study the sociology of culture. One of the major subfields within that subfield that they study is the media. And again, for myself, and why this week is fun for me, when I was very much researching video games, that's where that sort of research would fall under. How does the medium of video games shape socialization messages? How does playing a video game, an educational video game, say, compare to watching an educational video or reading a textbook? Those are questions that people are asking these days as well. So the media through time. So again, I'm not going to go, again, we delve into so much history. I'm not going to go into the specifics of everything. Some of these you'll know. Some of these you won't know quite as much. Oh, my microphone little thing fell off. Talking about media. So prehistoric cave art is typically seen as the first form of official media. So again, if you think of cave art, it was early humans' attempt to capture in some sort of permanence patterns they were seeing in the real world. So if you look at, I'm not a cave art expert, but when I've watched enough media and TV and movies and read history books to see some, to inductively see some trends myself in cave art. In prehistoric cave art, again, prehistoric meaning like pre-recorded history, you'll often see depictions of animals, of humans, and not quite as often, I think, but you'll even see kind of landscapes and monuments of the time. But these were often drawn in ways to help members of the community. So if a new animal was seen, or something that seemed particularly dangerous, you may see a picture of something that looks like a big bear in front of someone that looks like a human. Maybe, and that could represent, be careful, because this area has these huge monsters that may attack you. So then hieroglyphics and the alphabet, so different cultures, once language was becoming more robust and sophisticated, you see cuneiform hieroglyphics, so forms of, you can read them, so kind of like in other languages that use symbols rather than letters, but the development of, again, kind of alphanumerics and Roman numerals, and all of these things comes into being much later in time. And then we see all the forms of media that we know available. So once the alphabet is kind of constructed as a thing that people use, and languages, despite their variation, tend to have, or they all have alphabets in common, we then start to see the development of newspapers, telegraphs, phonographs. Again, so those are telegraphs and phonographs are using advances in telecommunications, but they kind of went away once we had radio and TV and the phone developed more, we stopped using those words, and those just became basically television and telecommunications. And then moving pictures, films, radio, TV, and the internet. So again, I put the picture there of the cave art as, in terms of the medium being the message, the key point, I think, of seeing the media through time is that the media that we have available to us enable us, or they're almost completely what enable us to express our ideas. So relating it to course concepts, structure and agency, the amount of agency that you have in terms of communicating your ideas to one another is dependent on the cultural ways of communicating that you have, right? So, and you can think of this in very simple, kind of funny terms. So imagine I say, oh, I want to communicate a really, really complex, physics equation to someone, but I have no idea what I'm doing or what I'm looking at. I can't communicate that. So I can't communicate a physics message to you because I don't, that medium exists, but I have no access to it because I don't know anything about it. It's the same as if I said I want to write you a letter, a poem or something in Arabic, and I have no idea of the language. The medium exists, but it doesn't exist for me. I don't know it. So here, this essentially is saying cultures, going back to the Culture Week when we said the importance of not being ethnocentric and judging cultures kind of by their own standards. Every time period and every place has different media by which people communicate, and that shapes how they think about things. So again, the convergence we're seeing kind of around the world with the development of written language, the development of newspapers, television, and the internet, and kind of jumping ahead a few weeks to globalization, is that there is increasing homogenization in terms of media. So the messages that we're communicating around the world are starting to get more similar. And some people see that as good and some people as bad. But again, we'll get to that at the end of this lecture, and that'll be more of a point in the Globalization Week. But again, so just remember, cave art is the same kind of human effort to use your agency and let other people know about things, get your story out, but it's much more limited in terms of what you can do with it, say, than writing Twitter posts, doing blogs, sending out newspapers, doing video lectures. You have so many more ways of getting specific ideas across than drawing kind of general pictures. And again, everyone in that culture may not even know how to do that. Just as how in our current time, even though you could say, oh, we have unlimited media, we have sophisticated math, we have linguistics equations, we have computer software, not everyone knows how to use those different forms of media as well. And that's the point of education, to teach us how to use all of these methods of really thinking that we have available to us. So the media today, as I said, has gotten sufficiently more complex, but also, maybe quirky and silly sometimes too. That's supposed to be me doing cave art on the bottom left, drawing little photos of myself. The funny thing is, though, that drawing wasn't even drawn. None of that was drawn by me, so that's what's funny. That again, the technologies we have available to us enable me to pretend that I'm doing any of that. So the media today, again, the biggest advances that we have, you'll see what's the common connection between all of these forms of media? What do they all depend on? Yeah, the internet. Right, so the internet, I like speaking in terms of kind of major epochal shifts and turning points in this class. So as you'll see, it's no coincidence that all of the media today are dependent on the internet. I told you that time period of the 50s and 60s, even though that's not really when we think of the internet as becoming mass. It was starting to be developed, by government agencies and things like NASA at that time. But only really became mainstream for most people in the early 90s. All the media we use now is dominated by the internet. Again, Netflix taking over TV, Apple, Google, Amazon. It's very hard to think of companies that, even older ones that are still around. So Rogers, Bell, Disney, anything that may use media in other modes, like the phone or TV or movies. They're all competing they're competing with companies that were completely formed after the birth of the internet, and they are expanding their own product lines to incorporate the internet in their use. So again, things obviously Rogers and Bell starting to sell internet plans and mobile data and hybrid plans and all of that. And Disney as well, starting to air their movies on Netflix and have more internet and website programming. So in terms of delineating kind of aspects of media, again, Harold Innis is a key thinker in this regard, and he looks at a key differentiator around space and time. So he said, again, this week, like the Culture Week, we balance cultural specificity and difference, or relativism, with kind of cultural universals. Again, each society and each time is unique. There's only one Toronto circa 1990, or right now, the present day, only one, U of T Scarborough Sociology 03 class, but as far as we know, but there are similar stages and similar problems that people confront. So in terms of time-biased media, so these are media that have longevity. So they're media, again, biased here. It's nothing negative. It just means that these media are oriented towards time. So they're oriented to last a very long time. So again, things like cave art, you can go to ancient sites and you will still see them around. Space-based biased media can convey messages readily over physical distance. So these are things that are usually fleeting in duration. So they could be a speech that's made over TV, a radio transmission. You could argue and say someone could record it and then you could keep replaying it. But basically he's saying here that there are either media that are permanent. So again, a painting, think of the Mona Lisa, that is always there. You can always look at it, versus a recorded speech. The same second out of a speech can only be playing for that 1 second. You can keep replaying it, but it's different than something that's just there. So this should draw a connection to something from the Culture Week. So in terms of culture, remember we talked about tangible and intangible culture, right? So show of hands, do you think time-biased media would be intangible? Do you think it would be tangible? Yes, it would be. So why would time-biased media be tangible? Anyone? Yep.
Because the media is more like physical objects to like display.
Yeah, so a time-biased media. So again, this seems kind of abstract, but it's very simple. Again, a time-biased media, or time-biased media, again, media is plural. A time-biased medium is something that is just there. It's permanent. So it could be a rock. It could be a painting. It could be, a rock that was carved or something on it. It could be a chair. You could say if the chair was supposed to communicate something. If I just put the chair right in the middle of the room, then it would kind of be a message. It would make you think, oh, maybe someone's going to come up today and speak to the class, right? So that's a permanent medium. Whereas one that's space-biased, that would be more like the Canadian anthem, or something. Technically you could write it on a piece of paper, but the message itself is only getting across while it's playing. So again, the space-biased one is a little bit more difficult to think through, but again, it's more of a literal message that you're communicating. And usually those ones, again, think of the word bias. Time-biased media, their major orientation is to be enduring. So it's something you build and it's always there. Space-biased, yes, it can be recorded after the fact, but the main purpose of it, like a YouTube video or something, is to kind of get a message out to tons of people at once. So the classic case of a space-biased medium would be like a presidential address that's given on a news network. So everyone around the world can hear it, and then it's gone. So the point here is that our understanding of our own worlds are biased by the kinds of media that we have. So again, so this is very key to right now, and I use the example of recording as problematizing this. We very much live in a time where most of our media tends towards space-biased. So think of, again, the idea of making blogs, video posts. Most of our forms of communication, the tendency is for people to, like new things on Instagram, see new things on their Facebook feed. We're usually not going back to archives of media. So the critique of contemporary culture is that people are very frenetic in their use of culture. Like we just want new things all the time. And space-biased media is more likely to draw that sort of reception from the audience. Again, we're overwhelmed with tons of messages. Versus if we were in a space of more time-biased media, say like 100 years ago, it would be more that you would be looking at, say, art in galleries and monuments and more physical objects that are usually take longer to create and then stick around in one spot. Okay, so this idea that the kind of media we have, whether we're drawing paintings or whether we are making YouTube videos and doing blog posts, Marshall McLuhan is one of the key media scholars. He's Canadian. Which is nice, to have that as a kind of in-house academic. There's actually a Marshall McLuhan Center at the U of T St. George, and he's frequently discussed. He's probably the major thinker in the sociology of the media or media studies. And so his central point is that the media mediates. So again, think of the linguistic choices. So remember, mediating means, let's say there's person A and person B, and they're arguing with one another. A mediator would be a person that would come in and would try to make sense of both sides with one another. So say if a husband and wife are having a divorce, the mediator would be the respective lawyers, or real estate agents would be the mediators between two parties that want to buy property. And again, you'll see that the word medium is coming from the same root, which is intentional. So McLuhan says that the media mediates a culture's relationship with the world. So the kinds of tools we have to communicate with one another shape how we understand our environments. And that should make pretty common sense. Again, think of the biggest innovation in the last 20 years that people either love or hate of the smartphone. So remember, people often criticize, you'll see tons of memes about people being glued to their smartphones, not talking to one another, people becoming more antisocial. Books that I've read, like by Sherry Turkle, MIT psychologist, her book is called Alone Together, and she studied online gamers. I think I mentioned this in the first term, and she repeatedly found that people would, even though they were often in the same space, so they were like in internet cafes or classrooms, they were often secretly on their phones and kind of in their own little spaces and worlds. And so she created this concept of saying people were actually alone together, and that selfhood now is very, very insular. But anyway, that's one perspective on this. In this class, we learn a lot of perspectives. But the key point here is that, again, the media through which we have to communicate shape our culture. So a culture without smartphones, maybe we would have to make more eye contact with one another and talk to one another. I often think about how even just things like the Walkman shaped our culture. So the fact that you can expect most people will have headphones in when you're walking around, that shapes your local culture greatly. The fact that you can just not expect to have small talk with people. That may cause you to feel awkward talking to people because you rarely do it, compared to, say, how often your parents would. So these are all just little examples of how the technologies we have in the terms of communication, so media, how they shape our culture. And so they make visible what was once invisible. So what this means in terms of media shaping how we view our environment, what the media do, again, media, it's this awkward word because it's plural, but when you're using the media, like news and stuff, it's more singular. What different forms of media do is they make visible invisible social norms. So again, things like YouTube, Facebook, we clearly have certain interaction norms, liking one another's posts, disliking. These seeing them in the form of the media that we actually use to communicate represent to other cultures or let people around the world know, okay, in North America, in Toronto, March 2019, this culture values social communication and social networking, and you can look at our websites and social vehicles like LinkedIn and Facebook, and you can see a ton of convergence on how people share and disseminate and receive ideas. So again, media kind of lets you know what norms society has. So again, in prehistoric societies, you could look at caves and you could see, okay, the style of art that's drawn. Are they mostly focused on dangerous animals? Are they mostly focused on items? So what stage of civilization are they at? You can look at the media as a kind of insight into that. So again, if you were to look at Toronto, you might think, okay, this is a very technological city, looking at billboards, looking at pictures of devices that are up. Maybe we have climate change on our radar because a bunch of our media are converging on that topic, and politics, always talking about American politics and global affairs. You can kind of see these are key facets of our culture, of what people are talking about, what they're thinking about. And so again, here the key message, I think, so again, he studies the media and all of its facets, but he wrote this really excellent book chapter several decades ago called "The Medium is the Message." And so, importantly, he says, each medium influences the mind. Not just the message is important, but also the manner in which it's conveyed. So this is, again, when you see people either really lauding and liking certain cultural innovations or really disliking them, they're usually drawing on this idea of McLuhan. So let's think of classroom pedagogy and teaching. Now, as you'll notice, I did start making YouTube videos in December because I told you I went to that teaching boot camp, and people said, oh, you're funny when you use these sorts of videos and images and things. But I told them in response at that point, I said, well, part of like how I'm teaching my classes, I said, I don't want to use pictures, I don't want to use videos, like I want to make the kind of traditional medium of just PowerPoints and kind of talking and walking around. I want to make that fun. But, I kind of gave up halfway through. Well, I didn't give up, but I realized, what? I think this medium, I just, times have changed. It's like silly how much time changes in 10 years. But when I was a student 10 years ago, pretty much everything was just, like half my classes didn't even have PowerPoint slides. It was just someone talking. And so that was the culture I was used to. And I thought, well, I'm still relatively hip, or whatever the word is. I don't know. Rad. I don't know what word people use. Lit. Yeah, I know that. See, I know the words. I'm whatever. So I can try to jazz it up. But, again, I realized, what, fine, I'll just go in and use a new medium that will enable me to get my same message across. right? So I haven't tried to really change the course at all by making YouTube videos. I'm just using a medium that I know all of you guys use, and that would reframe the course. And so showing my colleagues the videos, they often say, "Oh, you're so brave to do that," because they just think it's like really out there to have the same messages through a medium that is usually intended for something very different and seen as much younger and seen as like not academic. I mean, there are some that use it, like the Open University and Sociology and crash courses and things, but I obviously don't have the technical skills or the time to make really, really great videos like those. So again, the medium is the message. Here are the critiques. So when I was thinking about using images, showing videos, the question, and every prof, so give them the benefit of the doubt if you think, why aren't they using these technologies or what are they doing? The debate within kind of the academy in terms of using more quote-unquote user-friendly technologies and things is, should people be learning through those forms of media? Are you doing students a disservice by showing them videos and images? Maybe text and speech is harder, but should you be kind of getting them to learn that way because that will help them, say, in graduate school or the real world? Again, I don't have a position either way, especially now that I've made YouTube videos. I think doing both is good, and I've learned from you guys. It was really the midterm when the feedback you got of really, it was it was a big consensus that you wanted more engagement in that way. And I agree, and I think that was good. Again, my fear was, I wanted to see if I could make it engaging without that. So again, when oftentimes, when again there's criticisms of the internet and smartphones and all of that, it's that people now like to receive information in small bursts. So if you think of, and again, at my teacher training, they say, students will lose their focus after like 12 minutes. And part of me doesn't want to believe that. I want to think, no, like you can focus for an hour. But then I think, well, can I even focus for an hour? I don't know. So, but anyway, so oftentimes when people are critical of technological innovations, they say, the medium is the message. And if we teach students through YouTube posts and blog posts and stuff, we're degrading what it means to have higher education, which should be, sort of dry in a way. But so anyway, that's just to give you a little bit of insight into the ivory tower, just from a lot of conversations I've had with my own professors. That's why there are some professors that will just absolutely refuse to even use PowerPoint, because they just think, no, the medium is the message. You're in university, you're supposed to be listening to someone kind of at the front that's like teaching you very complex things. And then other profs are on the other spectrum, where it's totally fun, group work, engaging, and those classes based on the fact that, again, as an audience, you have different learning styles, and that might be much closer to your learning style. The teachers on that side of the spectrum often are seen as much better by students. So again, the medium is the message. And whether you learn the same material from me talking here, or me playing that really loud music with the text on the screen, or me reading with images in the background, or me with the image in the background and images on the screen all at once, those are all different attempts to try to really make the message resonate with you, right? So it's kind of a little learning experiment. And again, I enjoy doing this because I am viewing it as kind of, you're a large class, so it's good to see what works. And it's, again, to tell my colleagues, okay, how do you get a balance of all of these different medias? So McLuhan also, so again, the medium is the message. Again, this is really, I kind of said that in a big, long way, but essentially it's the message itself is not all that's being communicated. The method you're using to communicate it, it is also shaping how the person receives it. So my idea of making YouTube videos was, well, just by virtue of making YouTube videos, it's going to be more fun, it's going to be relatable, it forces me to make shorter videos, they're accessible online. All of that will hopefully have you see the same content through a different theory or a different frame, right? Everything is symbolic interactionism. We're always coming at things with expectations. Me standing in the front may cue you like, oh, this is a boring lecture, whereas me doing something silly online, it's like, oh, this is funny and actually informative. That's kind of the hope anyway. So McLuhan, the medium of the message, is his main contribution, but so are his divisions between what he calls hot media and cool media. So we'll have our discussion question based on this. So these are really cool concepts, pun intended. So hot media, but they're not totally intuitive. So hot media are forms of tangible culture that totally overload one of your senses. Now these media may actually seem kind of not hot, like not loaded. They may seem, they're the more typically boring ones in a lot of cases. But these are media that are either totally engrossing or engaging, or totally boring. That's the way I look at it. So either they don't captivate you at all, or they completely captivate you. So these are things that you read or listen to, usually. So newspapers, books, and lectures. So basically, when they're hot, they're hot. So when you have a book that you can't put down, it's totally engaging your sight and your reading ability, right? When you're in a lecture or listening to a speech, that's totally captivating. Your audio system, your audiovisual system is totally firing. Now, cool media, on the other hand, are things like Instagram. So Instagram and Twitter. So technically, these have images on them and text, but they're not totally engrossing. And the reason why they're not totally engrossing is actually kind of counterproductive, in that usually there's text and images and sometimes sound all together. So YouTube videos are like this as well. You're being presented with a whole ton of stimulation, and really what you take out of it is more what you're perceiving it to be. So and think of YouTube, for example. Now that I'm a budding influencer and I look at my analytics page and I look at engagement trends and all of this, I could see that after 15 seconds people aren't buying in and then they're switching videos. So cool media, it's okay, is the message resonating with a person based on what they were expecting? They're throwing a lot at you, so it involves low definition, less information, and more demand. So again, compared to hot media, which is high definition and a lot of information, but only one sense organ. So Twitter and Facebook, everyone is trying to make this cool media hot, right? So they know that people are scrolling through posts, and then it's very hard to get likes and shares, so they're trying to saturate you with any one video. That's why when you look at video titles, they're often in all caps. They all, have weird symbols beside them, and they'll be connected to like celebrity names and things, because they know that it's a form of media that typically people scroll through and they kind of fish through. Versus a book, if you're going to read it, you're going to read it. And you might get bored while you're doing so, but if you actually read it, you're totally engaged. Now these concepts, again, these are slightly dated concepts, and you may disagree with the examples that I gave, and that's fine. Again, I'm not of the generation. So here's just a question to think through. Do you think McLuhan would consider Facebook to be hot media or cool media? So remember, the key distinction between hot and cool is hot media totally captivates you, and usually one sense, whereas cool media requires more engagement on the part of the person. So think of Facebook and think of how much it captivates you or not. And then what are some other examples of hot and cool media? And what are some examples of media that seem to fit both categories? So again, something that totally captivates you based on one sense versus things that are more general and vary across people in terms of how they're received. Okay, so go and talk. Now, some of you said you don't like the study buddy activities. Most of you said you do. So again, I can't please everyone. If you feel that you don't have a study buddy, you should go and make a new one. Because everyone here is friendly and amazing. Who thinks it would be cool media? Okay, does someone want to explain why they think it's cool media? Yep. Oh, what's up? No, go. That's fine. We'll get to him after. Yeah.
Okay. Well, because Facebook doesn't just encompass like one thing like what you said about the newspaper and stuff. Like it has news feed, it has communications, it has certain games and things like advertisements and such. So So I feel like that branches it off more. It's not as specific as required for hot media.
Yeah, so the argument could be made for Facebook being cool media because, okay, so think of what Facebook offers. Again, as Imran said, it has games, it has friends posts, it has frenemies posts, it has all of these things that you can look at. Every user kind of brings something different to it, right? So not only is the content user generated, but then, the kind of feed you look at and where you focus, you're bringing yourself to that. So some people would just say, people that aren't plugged into social media at all, or have no taste for it, they would just say, well, no, this isn't interesting to me. I don't want to follow people online that way. This medium has no draw for me. So again, I think, so you said that it could be mixed. Someone. Yeah, so why do you think it's mixed?
Okay, because I think it depends on how you post. Let's say, you post pictures of yourself and then no one comments on it, right? It's kind of sad, but because they just look at it, right? But if it's maybe a picture of you in a group or something, and then some of the comments and they're interactive and people comment too. But still.
Yeah, I mean, so again, the whole thing of Facebook, it's so broad. If you really dissect it, you could say, well, what about trending posts that are just one image, and then it's almost like you have, this, or someone posts a story that has a lot of traction and appeal. That's almost kind of like a newspaper article, which then would be hot media, right? Yep.
I think it's both, but in the beginning it used to be more cool media, now it's more hot media. In the beginning it was more so about you posting a status of pictures, you would like it and comment or whatnot. But now I feel like Facebook, there's a lot of articles or famous posts stuff that's yes you like and things, but it's a little bit less interactive.
Yeah, so again, a key part of cool media is interaction, both on the part of the user, but then in those formations of communities. So social media, again, was originally based on the idea of people forming communities with one another and chatting. But now a lot of people just passively use Facebook. They'll just read news, they'll use it as a source of news. So for a lot of people, Facebook is like a newspaper, which then means it's hot media. Or it could be, even if you're just looking at it for memes or something funny, you may be looking at it almost like a form of film or television. So again, some people may use it just to keep tabs on their family in a cool way, but other people, it may be a real draw. It may be very absorbing for one thing if they're always looking for their daily news on it. Yep.
Oh, I was going to say, Facebook basically is cool media made of many hot media. Contents that would fall under hot media. And it's not going to be about Facebook, but in terms of YouTube, I think when cool media becomes hot, a little too hot, that's kind of dangerous because it's really influential. So some people may react over that and it becomes a whole new universe or something.
Yeah, and that's so she was saying cool media like YouTube can become hot, and then that can become somewhat problematic. I often think of that, not that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I'm very surprised versus 10 years ago that YouTubers and vloggers and whatever are as popular as they are. I never would have thought, there would be, again, people like PewDiePie and stuff that have so many subscribers and views, and I just think that's not hot media for me. Again, like watching people on YouTube that way. But again, just what a difference 10 years makes, right? Because that wasn't what people did, when I was a teenager. And watching people stream on Twitch and stuff. Even the games that I played when I was competitive, I would only watch a couple elite players, but I'd rather see them in person. It wasn't a medium for me. The message came across as strange for me. It just wasn't part of my local culture. But yeah, I think those are great examples of how, again, Facebook is, when people become critical of social media, I do think it's exactly what the students said, that this was supposed to be cool media that you use, a few minutes a day or every other day, but now you have people glued to their smartphone, getting all their news from it, having all their social networks in it, and that could potentially be taking people away from the media that's supposed to be hot in real life, which should be like lectures and radio or whatever that someone of another generation may think you should be spending your time. Yep.
Just sort of building on what they did both as well, but I think just like if you look at it from the perspective that there's like conspiracies about the government and like the phone like tapping into like always listening to what you're talking about and like kind of like tracks what your interests when you're generally online. Facebook could be hot media because it's almost like a personalized newspaper for you. If you realize the type of advertisements everyone gets are personal. Like, no one's advertisements are the same. We already go on Facebook. It's all slightly different because they've been constructed to, like, more so, like, your viewpoints and, like, things that they think you would want to see. So, yeah, in that sense, I feel like it's also a form of hot media.
Definitely, yeah, and even Google, right? I'm always, whenever, like if you have an Android phone, whenever I see little news updates, it's always, it's shocking how it's becoming more and more of like a consistent kind of phone identity or something based on what I've been looking at. So when I was looking up teaching technologies even, it was articles on that. When I was and like just, it starts to become almost predictive. I look at things once, and then like I'm actually really liking all the suggestions. I know a couple of years ago I didn't, but I'm finding now, I'm like, well, maybe I'm just becoming Google's minion or something. Maybe my personality's changing, I don't know, but it's becoming more and more accurate, which is, yeah, kind of scary that I'm like, oh, am I that easy to market to? Am I that transparent? But anyway, yeah. So these are good questions to think about. Again, I think many of the traditional, and this is what I learned in that teaching workshop too, about people's attention span. And my own included. I mostly listen to audiobooks now, and it's much harder to sit down and read, a long book or an article, and that's becoming statistically more the case. People don't read large chunks of knowledge. They don't watch movies as often as they used to, in the same way, like start to finish. And the kinds of media we have, like streaming technologies, Netflix, Twitter, YouTube, everything curated yourself, or being curated by algorithms. Those shape the way we receive information and find things hot or cold. So we'll take a 10-minute break, and then when we get back, we will finish our foray into the media. And if you'd like any of these sociology pamphlets or more information about the focus group, again, I highly recommend you do that. That's this Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. You can take that information from the front. So now, again, coming back to the Culture Week, again, that's the week that has the most affinity with this one. We're going to talk about Canadian content legislation. And don't worry, it sounds drier than it is. Basically, CanCon, for those of you who haven't heard of it, are kind of government-mandated policies around how much or what proportion of a given media, so for example, TV, film, radio, print media, there are policies that are trying to boost the amount of Canadian content that is involved in these media. So basically to get the Canadian voice, whatever that is, after, remember, we had our whole discussion of, what is Canadian culture given how multicultural we are, and given, not so great things that have happened in the past, and new movements and globalization, that all these undergoing changes. There are still some forms of tangible and intangible culture that we think of as stereotypically Canadian, but, the question becomes, to what extent do we want those to be representative of Canada? So the CanCon issue is highly controversial, but I think, most people still understand why Canadian-generated content, again, so content that's generated by people that are residing in Canada, it's important that children and members of the population see what we're all creating. So again, the idea behind CanCon is that a wide range of our programming, so again, all the different forms of media that we have, should reflect Canadian values, ideas, opinions, and artistic creativity. A kind of far-reaching outcome of CanCon is to also enable Canadians through artistic and creative endeavors like acting to compete in a global landscape. So that people can enter those industries from here. Now, I have some friends in the acting industry, and I know that usually the story of among budding actors is they move to LA as soon as they can because the opportunities in Canada aren't so great. My partner makes documentary films on the side, and he says, the scene here is definitely much smaller than in the States, but there have been many government initiatives to try to increase CanCon and Canadian content. I live very near TIFF. Have any of you been to TIFF downtown? Yeah, so some of you have. So that's the Toronto International Film Festival. So TIFF is a globally renowned film festival. They have Hot Docs is globally renowned as well, so that's focused on documentaries. And TIFF recently has made very strong initiatives to boost specifically Indigenous Canadian programming, and they have tons of grants for people to again make Canadian content, as broad as that is. And again, in a world of globalization and cool media that's traversing all countries and platforms, things like YouTube, it's increasingly important to make sure, again, that Canada is somewhat represented. Because again, the vast bulk of the entertainment industry and even the academic industry, most of the articles and books you'll read in other courses are American. So, funnily enough, they use as the four criteria by which to judge whether something is CanCon or not. Again, Canadian content, CanCon. They use the acronym MAPLE. Remember, maple syrup was the one big thing we all kind of thought of when we thought of tangible Canadian culture. So, for example, when we look at whether music, this is just one example of things that apply, or how do you get something that's Canadian. So for music, it has to be composed by someone who's a Canadian. It has to be performed by someone who's Canadian. So the songwriter has to be Canadian. The person performing it has to be Canadian. Then the production has to occur in Canada, and the lyrics have to be written by a Canadian. So the songwriter has to be Canadian. The composer could be the person in charge of more the composition of instruments and the sound and everything. When they say by a Canadian, it doesn't have to be someone that's born in the country. So it's not trying to be nationalist or anything like that. It's just someone who is a resident of Canada. It doesn't matter where they're from otherwise, but they are currently a Canadian. And again, Canadian content, radio stations will have certain proportions of CanCon. It varies by station and by province. I won't get into all the distinctions, but over time and across place, the amount of CanCon you had to play varies. And radio stations wouldn't get provincial funding or municipal funding, depending on the radio station, if they didn't meet these guidelines. We'll see how there was resistance to that, but we'll get to that in the question. Television is treated in very much the same way. So you can't, and it's very important that all of the criteria are met. Now, I don't know if students get these emails. You probably do, but do you get emails from UTSC saying sometimes that there's filming happening in some of these buildings? Oh, okay, so I guess it's just up to the instructors to tell you. So I often get emails that the lecture halls, or not the lecture halls, but the buildings, like the science wing, that big space in front of the Starbucks, that's often used for filming. So I'd say probably once every 2 months, sometimes twice, sometimes even once a month, movies and stuff are filmed here. Now, just filming something in Canada for TV or film does not make it Canadian. Many people obviously will come to Toronto to do film shooting because it's much cheaper than doing it in, say, New York City or LA or Chicago. So they must meet all three of the following criteria. The producer themselves has to be Canadian. The key creative personnel, so the kind of people doing the storyboarding and the writing and the artistic shooting, they have to be Canadian. And then 75% of basically all the costs have to go to Canadians. So the videographers, the actors, all of those things, the bulk of them should be Canadian. Again, this is ensuring that, and especially, in the entertainment industry, which again, Canada does not have the greatest reputation around the world for producing music and film and television. As someone that grew up in the 90s, people would always make fun of CanCon, saying like, this TV station is only playing Canadian shows and they suck, like they're so cheap and the budget's bad and the actors are bad and all of that. So I think, I'm not judging that time, but I think, many recent initiatives have been put in place to boost this industry from within, rather than just having, Canadian talent flee to America. So, like any policy, this has a lot of debate. So, as I said, many people are critical of CanCon. They say, well, what great Canadian actors and musicians have there been? There's only like a handful in certain genres to many people. So they say, well, these regulations are unreasonable, they're intrusive, I'm running my rock radio station, and I only like, let's say, 5% of the songs that I play could genuinely be Canadian, but you're saying I have to play like 30%. So I have to play all these repeat songs that I don't like, and you're doing this to kind of boost Canada's image, but you're forcing me to do this. So they often criticize it and say it's ensuring mediocrity. So Canadian TV stations were very much fit this debate as well. They're trying to boost their ratings, and basically the response would be, I don't want to put a bunch of low budget, B-grade Canadian movies and TV shows on my station because people aren't going to want to watch them. It's a tough point for people because historically, Canadian TV, for sure, has not fared very well on the international level, and even at the national level. Increasingly, there's been some. That funny titled show that's out recently, Schitt's Creek. I don't know if any of you know that show. So there's and Little Mosque on the Prairie did really well, and so there have been shows in the last 10 years, I think, and there's always been a few, but again, historically, Canadian TV in particular had a reputation for not being very good. Canadian music, we have had quite a few big stars, just notably like Celine Dion, Shania Twain, and then now the person I always mentioned in the first term, Justin Bieber, and Drake and stuff. So music has been going up exponentially. But again, the major criticisms were that these initiatives may actually be setting back Canadian radio stations and TV programmers by forcing them to use content that wasn't going to draw an audience. Remember, these are people trying to build hot media platforms, and they're saying, no, the only people that will like this are people that are really into Canadiana and CanCon. So you're switching my hot media into this cool media, right? So that's where the concerns become important. Now, this sort of question, again, a lot of this content, even though, it's updated every year, media studies, I think, is, a lot of the terms and concepts we're using may not have as much applicability to things like YouTube and streaming and blogging and all these new forms of media. So I'd just like to think of what you think in terms of CanCon from your perspective, because again, I know TV is watched less, radio is listened less to, so maybe this might not be as much of an issue for people in this class. But so for this one, just spend a couple minutes. What do you think about Canadian content? Is it important for you to see Canadian content in TV or movies and to hear Canadian music? Going back to our week on culture, what exactly do you imagine when you think of, say, Canadian TV, film, and music? And who's represented and why is this important, or why should this be changed? So again, just talk amongst yourself for a couple minutes about what you think kind of CanCon is in terms of TV, film, and music, and whether you think it's significant. About Canadian content. Either so, anything. What do you think of when you think of it? Or do you think it's significant or problematic? Yep.
I find it really problematic because personally, I don't think like the notion of Canadian culture is kind of like, I don't agree with it because personally, I don't think like, I know Canada's very multicultural. And so everyone brings their own sort of like individual piece to the country. But in terms of like authentic Canadian, there is no authentic Canadian. Like we're based on a colonial history. Like Indigenous culture is, I guess, would be Canadian culture, which isn't represented in mainstream media, like very rarely. Like, I know you mentioned they're trying to get more like representation in, but like right now, that's not a thing. So saying it's Canadian culture is like, I don't think like it's not like authentic Canadian.
Right, no, and that's a central issue with Canadian content, that it's, again, who's being represented by these initiatives. If you look at a lot of Canadian content, it is what most people would think of as being kind of whitewashed. And so then, you know, there are initiatives now, but they're usually more artistic. So in these documentary films, having Indigenous people tell their own stories through film, but how much does that break into the mainstream, right? So not very much yet. So one major criticism, again, has been who's being represented by this, and is this the best way to kind of go about changing the Canadian national identity? Yep.
I feel like CanCon is a bit like this lazy work, because if you have just put in the work to make good enough shows and movies and advertise them so that people want to watch them, it's just like they're trying to push this idea that we have to watch it, even if it's not good, I don't want to watch it, just do better, so I would watch it. If I'm watching like a Canadian show, I want it to be good, so I don't want to just watch mediocre thing on TV. It's worse.
No. The argument of the people that push CanCon, they would say, well, the reason why our things are mediocre is because we're not funded to the same amount, and we don't have role models in Canada of good filmmakers, and so we need to kind of force it and stuff. So, but that's, you know, that's coming at it. Again, it's a fair criticism. Many people in the industry are like, you know, it's one of those awkward things of how do you boost the level of Canadian content without kind of forcing it on people at the same time. Yep.
I'd say why like many people see it problematic in a way is because, as you mentioned, many like talented people eventually go to the States and then they get famous there and then they come back here. So
Right.
like they're more known like through I don't know, like Americanized ways or whatever. But one thing that I've noticed is the huge difference between the United States and Canada is that in the United States it's melting pot, right? So like people are kind of like forced to assimilate their own culture into like what's considered standard in the States. But here it's multicultural, so it's celebrated, right? So for example, Kim's Convenience Store, Kim's Convenience, I've never like watched it personally, but I know that it's like really popular and it is authentically Canadian in a way that's like produced by Canadians and like, you know, actors are Canadians and like it's pretty popular. Yeah, that's a great example, I'd say.
Yeah, that's a great example because, so again, the Canadian content, I think Kim's Convenience is a great example of a show that has high production quality and is genuinely Canadian in terms of all of the actors and the writers and everything being Canadian, but also not representing kind of an old image of Canada, but you know, a kind of current immigrant demographic. And so it is, you know, showing, it's demonstrating Canada's multiculturalism, I think, in a way that many American shows wouldn't. No. Okay. Yep. Yep.
Doesn't it seem like it's less culturally based and more like economics, like trade barrier to protect the local producers, protect the local artists? That's what it seems like. Because like what
Yeah, no, I mean, I think much of the justification is economic, but it's often justified on cultural terms of more, you know, so rather than saying, okay, we need to ensure that members of this economic sector can actually succeed, it's often, you know, our Canadian identity needs to be made on the global stage, and we have all this hidden talent that doesn't have the opportunity to be presented. But I definitely do agree that, you know, I think people that support CanCon can defend it from either angle. So they'll depending on which audience they're trying to win over, they could say, yeah, this is just an economic thing that, you know, we have film schools here, we have acting colleges, and people that graduate from these programs should have somewhere to work. For example, we have a very, like, you know, people don't criticize the National Ballet, you know, I'm just, it's blank, my mind's blanking out, but I'm thinking of, Stratford, Ontario, where a lot of great Shakespearean and other plays are performed. So we have very good playwriting and playcraft, and very good ballet, and no one, you know, criticizes those for being CanCon. So I think economically and socially, people are trying to boost this in other forms of media, saying let's get everything to that higher level. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be cultural, but just saying these are jobs like anything else, and this is an economic sector that happens to be cultural. Yep. Yep.
I think independence is actually not so important, because actually that it actually it just for the government to say that the Canadian content is more privileged than the other cultures. So actually that we just prevent the fusions from other cultures, and other cultures want to go into Canada, and actually it is the disadvantage for different cultures to communicate with each other.
Right, and so that's a great point too. That's another, you know, for every boost that you give to the local economy, so saying, okay, we're allocating certain resources and timelines to Canadian content, the argument could go, well, for every Canadian show you allocate, that's one less show from another country. So you may be trying to compete with America, but by giving Canada more of a landscape here, you're preventing other cultures from competing with America as well. So maybe there should be new policies that say, okay, 10% should be international programming and 15% Canadian or something. That has been a criticism. There are things, I forget what the network's called, but there are certain kind of multicultural networks on mainstream Canadian shows. I forget, what is it? It was like Channel 2 or something. Channel 2 or Channel 4, at least when I was in the 90s. They changed its brand, but it was basically a multicultural version of City TV. So they would play like Italian shows, Chinese shows, other things that were popular in other countries with English subtitles, and sometimes dubbed. And I think they were following that argument as well. Okay, so we're nearing the end of our media week. So just so you'll see, there's only 5 more things. So theories and the media. So as usual, we start with functionalism and the ideas of not necessarily Durkheim, but more just people that think in that way. So the key functions of the media are pretty simple to functionalists. Again, they help socialize, they help surveil, they educate, and they entertain. So in terms of socialization, again, this is a theme we discussed several times throughout the course. So in our socialization week, in the education week, in the week on families and education, and in the week on socialization, families, and culture and education. So at least 4 weeks we've discussed this. So remember, I stated that many functions of the family itself have kind of been put into larger mass societal institutions or bureaucratic institutions, you could think of them that way. So child rearing, kind of the passing on of values and traditions, for better or for worse, many children are taught these things through TV and through educators at school who are themselves using media. You know, again, think of criticisms of contemporary society where parents are letting their kids be raised by their smartphones and by TV and the internet. So mass media are very important to functionalists in a positive way of saying, well, again, as McLuhan said, the medium is the message, and there's more going on when someone reads a message perceives a message than just the direct translation. They're learning about the societal culture. They're learning, you know, if you're watching YouTube videos, you're learning what kind of entertainment is valued. You're learning what kind of norms people either agree with or disagree with, right? When people are complaining about something online, when they're protesting, or when they're like really valuing something. The media, again, is teaching you the cultural values. Mass media also has, again, mass media being media that's widely available to everyone in a population. It also has a surveillance function. As the student in the front said, it's kind of scary when you think of things like Facebook gathering our information. But even when you go just back to television, so thinking from, you know, the 50s onwards, ratings, television ratings, are indicators of what people are actually watching. So when stations would compete with one another, part of it, yes, would be economic, thinking, okay, we need to have hot media, we need to be drawing people into watching us. But it's also very telling, sociologically, you know, the extent to which people are, say, watching historical biographies at 8 p.m. or whether they're watching, like, slapstick comedy, people, like, beating each other up or you know, comparing memes or something. I don't know what people do. But it's interesting to see how people in a society are spending their time. And so the media allows us to gather that information through things like ratings. Again, I overheard a comment of someone saying, you know, like, where's our society when these sorts of funny videos of, I think it was people throwing cheese at each other or something, you know, when those are super popular, you think, oh, like, is that what society values? So, you know, think of videos like that 50 years ago and you would be, like, stigmatized or something, whereas now, I mean, maybe you still are, but it's more in an ironic way, and you're getting money from YouTube. So the surveillance function is linked to the socialization function. Again, it's making the culture visible. Remember, McLuhan said that media make culture visible. So they make the invisible, they make the intangible culture tangible. So you can say, okay, this is clearly a society that values some sort of irony and satire, and they're critical of the status quo, or many people value social justice, or whatever certain values are. We see it based on what's popular. The correlation function, so that's things like memes, and even like sociology crash course videos, and what I'm trying to do in my own way. So media enable the transference of complex messages in simpler and often funny terms. So you see there's an increasing trend in that in communication. So people trying to make short, compact, highly visual, but also audio messages. So not necessarily dumbing things down to the lowest common denominator, but making things easily accessible. So not only to people of different learning styles, but importantly, people with different motivations. So how do you make something, remember, that's why I said the categories of hot and cool were a little bit rigid. Again, hot media requires absolute kind of sensory engagement. The question among influencers and things and educators is, you know, how do you get someone engaged that maybe doesn't really think they want to be engaged? How do you pull in the skeptical audience? So the correlation function is, you know, maybe people might rebel against their parents and against teachers and against, you know, the quote-unquote man in society telling them what to do. But mass media is actually transmitting a lot of these values in kind of simple, fun ways through the kinds of shows that are on and the kind of music that's being listened to. So again, thinking of criticisms of CanCon, Much of earlier Canadian content, just like most television content, was really kind of representing, you know, that classic nuclear family, mostly white in the case of America and Canada, and that was kind of the image of family life. And you'd see people, you know, quote unquote street people being arrested, and many values that people were teaching their children or they were learning in school were also available on TV. And presented in a way that was seemingly more fun and less dogmatic, but the same message was going across. And then tied to that, so linked to kind of Durkheim's idea of anime, is the entertainment function. So obviously, a latent effect of living in an organized society with lots of norms and laws, all these social facts and beliefs, is that some people may disagree with those things. So media here allows people to rest and kind of get their reprieve from the difficulties of social life and work as a form of escapism. So, you know, when you go on Facebook, when you go on Twitter, when you watch TV, all of that entertainment is, you know, for many people that's your reward for a hard day's work. Or it's, you know, procrastination before you do your hard day's work, hopefully. But ultimately allows you, you know, when you think of retirement, when I had that question in the Health and Aging Week of, you know, what kind of retirement do you think is ideal, and do you think retirement's changing? The classic idea of media has been this sort of reward for being a functional member of society, that you can afford to partake in expensive media. So things like video gaming, Blu-ray, video players, nice computers, all of these things. So a functionalist perspective, again, sees media as functional, of helping people not revolt against society because they enjoy the media, they learn their values from the media, and they get complex ideas kind of implicitly. So again, by watching Canadian TV, listening to music, by going on Facebook and YouTube, you're learning relevant news facts, you're learning public opinions, and it's all in a way that's more fun and easier to digest than, say, if you were looking at academic journals and news articles and listening to the BBC or something. Conflict theory would agree with all of those things, but like as usual, they would say, we need to look. So my question about CanCon being potentially problematic, conflict that is inspired by conflict theory. So we need to see where the sources of the media are coming from. So as I mentioned, their mass media are seen as vehicles of messages. And so here they're saying, well, they're vehicles of messages that are designed to control the masses and pacify them. So video games, for example, that's a very polarizing issue that many people think, well, you know, video games allow you to form social communities for people that are bullied. They allow you to live a second life, all of which are true. But on the other hand, video games are also created by organizations that are capitalizing on our kind of psychological makeup and our intrinsic reward systems. The gamification of everything. We're seeing it, you know, on the way that we're catered to with personalized advertisements. Even things like Revel. Things are becoming more game-like in order to sell their products. So conflict theory says who's benefiting from media messages that we're learning, and are they really neutral? And are they functional? They may seem functional, but they may be actually key to maintaining different kinds of inequality. And so they, again, with the case of video games, yes, individuals can find great solace and happiness playing games, but at the same time, they're reinforcing a culture maybe where people need to escape, right? So in my own example of playing video games, again, I had this torn relationship where, you know, I played video games a lot to escape problems in my life, but then by virtue of doing so, I wasn't actually changing those things in my life, right? And, you know, everyone has different opinions about things like that, but, you know, reading both midterms of yours that I read all of the first one, all of your comments, and in the second one, and it was still a theme in the 30 or so that I read. I know many of you on the question about reading week, and when you were talking about the winter break, you said, oh, I'm overwhelmed with school, but it's partly my own fault because I'm not like doing work over reading week or over the break. And I know these catch-22s, right? That's a time where you're supposed to relax, but then you relax and then you feel guilty because then you're like, well, I could have used this time to get ahead. So conflict theory here is saying, this quote-unquote entertainment function, maybe it's just entertaining you so you don't focus on the fact that you're working for someone else and you're following norms that are benefiting other people, right? So video games, again, I'm not demonizing them, but when people are critical of video games, it's saying, oh yeah, video games are great and they're fun, but they're blinding you to the fact that they're making you okay with working for someone else and being a proletariat. It's very much, remember Marx's famous quote, that religion is the opiate of the masses. Mass media is the opiate of the masses in that it helps you cope with all the problems of your life and not challenge it. So the propaganda model, again, of it saying, oh yeah, work is great because you can live for the weekend and you can have time off and you can go and have fun on YouTube. All of it prevents social change from this perspective. Symbolic interactionism, again, doesn't get into this big debate of is it functional versus is it blinding you from social change? And again, just asks, how do people use these technologies? They would say, again, both of these sides are very true. Some people do learn a lot about their local cultures using social media. They're plugged in through things like LinkedIn and Facebook. They get a lot out of them and it's very functional. But for other people, it can be quite negative. They may go deep into the dark webs of the internet and become isolated and angry. They may use media that becomes like propaganda and get insular worldviews. So symbolic interactionism is, again, how can media be functional sometimes? How can it be reflecting dominant interests in other times? And feminists and post-structural, I put them on one slide because, again, like usual, they have a lot of commonalities. So feminist theory, building on the student's comment about the kind of lack of indigenous media in Canada, they say women have traditionally, when they have been portrayed in the media, it's often in highly sexualized ways. There are issues involving women's involvement, so the kinds of stereotypes that are played. So when you think of, women's roles have been evolving a lot in the mass media over the last 50 years. Think movies like Wonder Woman, many action movies now having leading female stars, again going against that kind of classic Disney-like image of the damsel in distress. But feminist theory has been focusing on, to what extent does the media reinforce negative images of women, and to what extent does it actually help them? And pornography has been, we don't get that much into we don't really get into it in this class very much, but pornography, as per the debates centering usually around the work of Catherine McKinnon in the 1980s, some feminists saw pornography as just kind of blatant exploitation of women, but other feminists saw it as liberating for women. That's kind of one of the major distinctions between second wave and third wave feminism, right? In second wave feminism, women are often seen as being portrayed as sexualized and exploited. Third wave feminism agrees that that's often the case, but then they say, well, like men, women are also sexual beings, and maybe the media can actually help them reclaim that. So things that I mentioned before, like slut walk and calling out facts like slut shaming, and saying no, women should be allowed to be presented in the media in different ways, and it shouldn't be reinforcing negative stereotypes. It should be the same as for men, that women are humans like men and should be able to be portrayed in multiple ways. Post-structuralism, again, always kind of the most complicated theory theoretically, but the nuts and bolts of this is that they focus on the influence of images and signs. So the two concepts of simulation and the hyper-real. So basically, they get into a lot of complication. But post-structuralists, as I've explained a few times, are post-structural again in the sense that They always say there's more going on than just the social structures that we have around us. And so the media, by playing around with it, we can so they go high on the agency part of structure and agency. Post-structuralists say, you know, we can really utilize the media to change how people think about the world. So media may have historically been, for example, whitewashed or elitist, but the media has the potential for us to liberate ourselves. We just have to make sure that we're actually realizing that the media is hyper-real and a simulation. So in terms of hyper-reality, again, think of that hot media that's really engaging. So you know, you shouldn't just avoid the media and say, oh no, people are being duped through it. You should think, okay, let's say my aim is social justice, or whatever my aim is, how do I utilize media to really get that message across? So again, they're critical. Post-structuralists are always critical and focused on power, but they're very focused on reclaiming the modes of power that we have. So for example, queer theorists that are post-structuralists looking at the media would say, okay, how do we use the media to challenge heterosexism? Maybe that involves having more shows like Modern Family, where people you know, show different family formations. Maybe having shows with more polygamous couples and polygamous pairings. All of this, again, would be ways of changing reality through hyper-reality, again, through these modes of hot engagement. And then lastly, just a couple of criticisms to the future of mass media. So two big issues that people have been critical of across theoretical schools are internet addiction, or media addiction more generally, and the homogenization of culture. So in terms of internet addiction, again, there have been numerous studies around the world finding that youth in particular, but also older individuals, have been finding themselves isolated, depressed, tired through heavy use of the internet. So when you see memes about people being glued to their phones, for many people that is true. Now, again, this isn't to turn it into a moral panic. Very often internet addiction is a symptom of a larger social problem. Many people that are addicted to the internet and gaming, again, this is something I know what my dissertation originally was going to be on. Many people that are addicted to technology, they often come from, you know, not the coziest home environments. They're often new to their neighborhood. They're in dispossessed areas. They're often economically disenfranchised. They're individuals that are looking for social connections and often have to do so online because they don't have friends in real life or they have low self-esteem. So usually internet addiction comes from a deeper problem. The kind of image of internet addiction that started coming out in the 90s was that the internet would like just instantly get your kids addicted. But that's not usually what happens. It's usually someone that's already suffering in terms of their mental health, and then the internet is seen as something that can help them, but then that can blossom into a real problem. So for example, I can think of my friends in my gaming community where, say, you know, you're at school, you don't have very many friends, you realize you play the same game as someone else, then you join a video game club, and then what goes from an activity that you were just playing by yourself, kind of an hour a day, then becomes this activity that you do now with the social circle every day, and then that becomes more interesting to you than school, and then you drop out of school to do a gaming career, and then you teach Sociology 10 years later. So yeah, that you was really me. But so, you know, and again, admittedly, I don't view it as an addiction now, but gaming became my life in that way. And so I'm very sympathetic when people tell me, you know, oh, I have to be on social media 10 hours a day. And when I talk to people, even some of the people I interviewed about work, and this topic came up, it very often is that the internet is filling in some void in their life. So it's not that it's some thing to be demonized and it's getting people addicted. I had other issues going on in my life that then made the internet, well, which for me was video games, that was my media. Video games really were a social thing for me. It wasn't isolating, but it only was later in my life that I kind of thought, oh, I've kind of closed a lot of doors through this, and maybe that's something I should manage a bit. Oh.
I was just going to say, it reminded what you just said reminded me of it. My brother, he's like a heavy Fortnite user, addicted. Like, I can safely say he's addicted. He's always on it and gets like angry when he doesn't play. But him and his friends, like, they don't hang out anymore, like ever. And he's in grade 9, so he's pretty young still. But the reason they don't hang out is because like my brother has like a justification for it. He's like, well, we can't play together if we actually hang out because I guess you need to be on different screens or whatever. So like they'll purposely all stay home all day by themselves, playing on the game together. I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah.
But, like they'll be like talking like literally from 9 a.m. until like past midnight, and they don't see each other.
Yeah, no, and for me, the games I played, because it was pre-internet, when I played arcade games, so it would be physical in person, but then once those games shifted online, then it was all online. And then it was around that time that I was like, okay, like, I'm 20 years old now, I can't, like, this isn't working for me anymore, but again, it's you know, just to bring it full circle to the addiction thing, as I mentioned last summer, the video game addiction became in the DS, like it's actually in the DSM. That's a real addiction because it, like drug addiction and things, you know, it's not that drugs are necessarily always bad, and the internet, obviously everyone uses it, and it can do so many good things for you. But in my perspective, from what I've read and what I've experienced, something is classified as an addiction when it kind of uncontrollably replaces other roles in your life. And so, again, it's just not to scare anyone in this room and make you think you have you're internet addicted or whatever. But you know, if I did notice it as a common theme on both tests, that many of you feel I don't know, you have a compulsion to procrastinate. A lot of that comes from internet usage. And I know, you know, being first year, maybe that changed. It would just be an interesting thing to think through, a thought experiment. If you use the internet now more than you did in high school, I would imagine that many of you do, even though you have less time, because you're in a new environment, and, you know, many of you have expressed that it's hard to make friends and all of that. So that's why my little hokey study buddy thing is to try to make you guys all networked and a warm environment. So anyway, it might not always work, but it's to try to make this a bit more like high school, where I think, you know, you want to be out in the real world with your friends versus living a dream world on your own. And again, I'm not judging it. I'm just only speaking from the combination of my research and my own experiences of seeing people that become what are called heavy users of the internet or gaming, and how it can become problematic for a person. I've already discussed the homogenization of culture. So again, globalization, that's where the class will end up, but a big criticism is that cultures around the world are becoming more similar because, remember I said early on, I opened up the lecture by saying people used to study cultures by looking at the kinds of media they used. So different cultures some would be more focused on painting, others would be more focused on writing, for example, others on music. But now with mass communication spreading the way that it is, and things like Facebook and YouTube and certain kinds of TV like Netflix dominating, cultures around the world arguably are becoming more similar. And this could be, you know, that could be good. Maybe you could say everyone around the world is becoming a tighter community, but you could also say one certain way of life is dominating other ones. So if you're looking at that from a conflict perspective, it could be, you could say, well, the elite countries in the world own much of this contemporary media, and their messages are becoming dominant around the world versus more marginalized voices of typically the global south. So lastly, so just themes to think about in terms of mass media going forward. 3 key issues: increased mobility and access to information, democratic potential, and the potential to build online communities. So to end on a good note, because the last 2 were kind of negative, you know, mass communication, I think overall, I mean, you know, social scientists aren't good at predicting things, unfortunately, but mass media, at least I can safely say it holds great potential in these 3 regards. So easy access to information, the internet, and we all have some access to it, whether at a public library or institution or on our phone. Increasingly, access to the internet is rapidly growing around the world, and access to the internet and even a very rudimentary phone or computer now, by contemporary standards, enables you access to millions of resources online, free books, streaming content, and people are increasingly making copyright-free content. So more and more information and free education are becoming available. A democratic potential, so things like YouTube, meaning it's your television. Tube is often was a word for television. User-generated content, so things made by all of us, are increasingly becoming seen on the internet. Even silly things like memes, those are still made by people, so we're getting our voices out there. The extent to which we do that is an empirical question, but at least it's available. And then lastly, as I said, the potential to build online communities. So people like Sherry Turkle that show, she looks at both the good and bad of online communities, but online communities are huge. Again, my research on pedophilia, I looked at more generally people that used online web forums as modes of self-help. So people with very stigmatized identities, people, in my case I was looking at non-active pedophiles, they go online because they say, well, I feel like a monster and a freak and I can't talk to anyone, but I can go online and talk to people around the world that share my opinion. Many social movements start online this way too. People bonding together and saying, I'm experiencing this in my local community, what should I do? And people band together. Obviously, in the case of pedophilia, for example, that can work both ways. The ideal, and what the website I was on was trying to do, it was trying to give these people an opportunity to get help. But many people did use those forums to actually kind of become more defensive. And so they would form kind of like toxic communities that would advocate pedophilia. So again, these communities can work both ways. Same with the gaming community. It could be something that allows you to build a lot of friends, or it could be kind of like a haters club where everyone goes on and then says, games for life, you're lame if you don't play. And then it, that's not really healthy for anyone. Okay. So true or false to see if you've been remembering names. So show of hands, Harold Innis argued that the medium is the message. Put up your hand if you think it's true. Put up your hand if you think it's false. Okay, good. Who said it? Marshall McLuhan. Okay, good. Okay, so just questions to think about before the videos for today. So what are some of the issues surrounding CanCon regulations? What are the positive and negative outcomes of such regulatory practices? What are some of the fears associated with the rapid growth of technology? Is technological advancement positive or detrimental for social networks? So I didn't address it in that directive a way, but that was more when I was talking about the homogenization of culture and also the conflict theory perspective. Again, we're having all these ways of getting our voice out, but whose voice is it, right? So if you're thinking of big mass media, and then you're thinking of a country in the quote-unquote third world, are they being represented by YouTube very well? Just the issues of representation. And then compare and contrast sociological approaches to the mass media. Again, like anything else, it can be viewed through all of the theories. I would say for this one, the core debate is, like most, between functionalism and conflict theory. Again, are you optimistic in terms of thinking that mass media will bring people together and boost society as a form of technology, or do you think it's kind of going to make us more atomized and privilege the people that are already privileged?